How's it going, everybody, and welcome to another Guild Wars 2 Mysteries. This is the first of a couple of episodes I'm hoping to do that are still based on the Guild Wars lore and still based on mysteries in particular within the Guild Wars lore, but revolving around the origin of the playable races, and perhaps at the end as well we'll do a little bit on some of the other interesting ones too. It's maybe something you've never thought about with this game, like where your race came from, what are the roots of the character that you're playing as. But actually, if you do look, you'll find ArenaNet's put quite a bit of information out there around the origin of these races, and namely, they've all got something mysterious. The puzzle is never fully completed. And I find that quite compelling and quite interesting, so I thought I'd share it with you guys. For the first episode, we're going to be looking at the humans. So let's have a look at who the humans are in Guild Wars 2 present day right now. We can only play on the continent of Tyria, of course, as you guys know. There are two more continents that exist in the lore and in the universe, at least, which we saw in the first game. There's also a large world map that had been data mined out of the game that you can see in the Order of Whispers base, which shows vast amounts of Tyria. That Tyria is a huge planet with lots of different continents on it, and we've only seen a comparatively tiny slice. And I'll get back to that at the end. But in Guild Wars 2 present day, on the continent of Tyria, the humans have been largely pushed back from what they originally were. They only really have a major presence in Crater. If we were to dial back the clock about 250 to 270 years ago, you would find that's a very different story. Back then, just before Guild Wars 1 launched, basically, the humans were all over Tyria, the continent. They were the dominant force. Namely, there were three significant nations that existed during that time. There was not just Crater, but there was also Ascalon and there was Or. The humans were doing really well for themselves, and there seemed to be no end in sight. Well, that end was brought about by the Char, and over the 250 years between Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2, we have seen the complete destruction and ruination of Or, which pretty much led to all of those citizens being killed, and a long conflict with Ascalon that slowly saw the Char win it back from the Ascalonians, and now the only humans that are left about are in Crater. All of that stuff's kind of basic though, you know, that's the kind of stuff you can glean from maybe having played the first game, or at least from paying a little bit of attention during the second game. What you might not know about the human origins in Tyria, at least, is that Crater, which is now the only human nation left on the whole continent, was itself actually just a colony belonging to a different group of men living on another continent to the south, the men of Elona. Crater was just a colony. It wasn't really a part of Tyria or integrated into Tyria, shall we say, for a long time. In fact, both Or and Ascalon as nations were already established long before Crater finally did the same. For a long time, they were kind of aliens to this continent. And that explains why, in Guild Wars 1, you can see that Cretans have got a much more exotic look and feel about them. Not just the landscapes and environments themselves that Crater had, which were a lot more tropical back then, but the actual people themselves looked very different to the Ascalonians, for example, and they had a very particular way of dressing, and they had a very particular way of living. For example, in Guild Wars 1, you could actually see mummies on boats and things, and very kind of Egyptian themes going on in Crater if you looked closely for them. And that sounds crazy now. You would never expect to see that in Guild Wars 2. Mummies in Divinity's Reach? No, of course that wouldn't happen. The reason for that is that in the 250 years, as Or was destroyed, and as Ascalon was slowly brought down under the Char, the humans basically fled and sort of all congregated in Crater. And now Crater is the last bastion of humanity, and it's a bit of a melting pot for many of the different human cultures. But this video is about the origins of humanity. Everything I'm telling you now, even though it spans over 200 to 300 years, is all quite recent. So I just explained to you guys that the Cretans were originally a colony of another nation of men. Well, who were they? You can't see this area in Guild Wars 2, it's not on the map yet. It is speculated that eventually it might come back with an expansion, but there is another continent south of Tyria called Elona, and there are men living there called the Elonians who have been on that continent for a lot longer than the men on Tyria. They first arrived there around 200 years before Or, which was the first of the Tyrian nations to ever exist, became a thing. So 200 years before any humans ever stepped foot on the lands you see currently in place in Guild Wars 2, they were already living on the southern continent of Elona. Now, because of this, the men of Elona actually have a longer history than we on the Tyrian continent do, and that was very clear in Guild Wars 1 when we got to visit the area. There was extensive detail of their history. It went through many different ages. Their civilization rose and then fell when it was hit by plague, and then rose and fell again when they were invaded by the undead, and so on. There was a lot of history there. Obviously, this video isn't a history course on Elona, but I do want to bring your attention to one specific landmark. See, in the very south of Elona, on the island province of Istan, you could find the ruins of something called Farina, the first city. And this is the place claimed by Elonians and remembered in history as being the very first city ever built on that continent. It's a really significant location. In fact, the construction of that city marks the same moment that Elonians started their calendars from. This was the moment that these people began to count time. And this happened earlier than the humans to the north did. See, up north we use the Mavelian calendar, and time, the year 0, begins when the gods left Tyria. But for the Elonians, they were already well underway with counting time before that happened, about 200 years before. Their calendar's called Dynastic Reckoning, and as I say, it starts at the very year that Farina, the first city, was built, and the very first of the primeval kings of Elona ever began to rule. The reason why I'm talking about Farina, though, is not just that it's a significant place and that it was supposedly the first city, or is the first city of Elona at least, it's the location of it. See, if the very first city, the very first place that civilization really was birthed, was in the south of the continent, and we know that mankind slowly migrated north to reach Tyria, that suggests that the men to reach Elona themselves had come from somewhere south, even before dynastic reckoning started. Just as the Critons came to Tyria from a southern continent, so did the Elonians come from the south as well. Before the age of the primeval kings, before Farina, the first city, was ever built, and before man ever stepped foot on Elona, humanity lived in Canthan. The first humans to ever appear in Canthan did that about 600 years before they appeared in Elona, before dynastic reckoning, and 800 years before the exodus of the gods. Almost 1,000 years before we started counting time on the continent you play Guild Wars 2 in right now, humanity was hanging about in Canthan way down to the south. And again, I may as well add, Canthans have their own calendar too, and their one counts year 0 from even further beyond dynastic reckoning. It's called the Canthan calendar. It's the earliest calendar we have so far. Time really wasn't recorded by any society that we know of older than the Canthans, and that starts, their year 0 is when the individual clans that were first roaming Canthan united, originally under a single emperor, whose name, by the way, was Kaineng Ta, which you can translate to First Lord Emperor of the Dragon. So yes, the Canthans not only are the oldest of the humans that we know on Tyria, but they're also the humans most connected to dragons, it seems. Is that a coincidence given the overarching story of Guild Wars 2? I really doubt it. Everything I've just said is known. That's all fact. That's stuff that was established in Guild Wars 1. Now, from here on the origins of the humans, all you can really do is speculate. So where did the humans come to Canthan from, for example? Did they just slowly evolve there? Is evolution a thing in Guild Wars, or were they simply created? Or did they just migrate to Canthan like they had migrated to Elona and to Kryta and to Or and Ascalon? Had they come, I guess, is what I'm saying, had they come from the south again? Well, some things do suggest that that could be true. But here's where the origin story gets kind of muddy. In the first game, in Guild Wars 1, we never got to go any further south of Canthan. There were only Elona, Tyria, and Canthan that we got to see. So we don't really know what's further south down there. As I said at the start of the video, there is a new map we can see that the Order of Whispers have got a hold of, that giant spinning globe in Guild Wars 2, that does show a full world map. Whether that's explicitly canon or not, I guess is still a a little bit disputable, but that map does show that there is a sizable landmass attached to the Canthan continent beyond what we saw in Guild Wars 1, and there's plenty of opportunity for mankind to have travelled from the south north to Canthan, and then north to Elona, and north to Tyria. There is the chance that that happens, we've just not had any explicit confirmation. First of all, this idea of them coming from the south is reinforced by one particular thing. In Canthan, there were two vassal states, the Kurziks and the Luxons. These were two distinct groups of people that lived in the most southern reaches of Canthan, and it is suggested that these two people did come to the continent from somewhere south themselves. So they moved north and then came to inhabit the Jade Sea and the Echovald Forest. The problem is that when we hear that these two people came north to Canthan, when that happened, the Dragon Empire, the rest of the Canthans, were already there. The Empire was a thing before that happened. It was in its infancy, but it existed. So here's the problem. Yes, the Kurziks and Luxons may have come from the south to move up, but someone else had beaten them to the punch. So where did they come from before the Kurziks and Luxons arrived on the scene? Perhaps they came from south too, there's nothing saying that they didn't. But there is a very interesting article called An Empire Divided, which I recommend every single time I possibly can. I think it was the best lore resource that ArenaNet have ever released. This was a large document written by an in-universe character, detailing the history and culture and society and basically what's going on in Canthan. And there's one moment in this article where this character says that it's very possible the humans of the Canthan Empire first arrived not from the south, but on Xingji Island. The idea is that Xingji was the very first place that humans came to Canthan from, and they spread to the mainland from there. So that puts a different spin on things. Maybe humanity originated not from south of Canthan, but from the seas west of Canthan, where they sailed over to Xingji. And if you have a look at the world map that was released with Guild Wars 2 in the Order of Whispers base, you can see there is an unnamed mysterious continent off on the west. So maybe that's where humanity's home lies, and maybe there are people still living there that we've just not come into contact with for a long time. They sailed east across the seas to Canthan, and then north to Elona, and eventually north to Tyria too. Now, in some ways, it might feel kind of pointless just trying to find the island that humans first came from, because it still doesn't answer the question of whether we evolved or we were created by the gods, or different gods, perhaps. Well, on that, ArenaNet have always been very quick to give us our answer, and it's a really interesting one. See, the story goes that humanity didn't evolve on Tyria. In fact, they're not native to the planet at all, and neither did the gods create them. The gods simply moved them. They brought humanity to Tyria from a different place in the universe. They didn't create us, they shepherded us, perhaps without our consent even, to our new home on this planet. We're not alone in this fact. The gods also had brought the snake-like people, the Forgotten, who you don't see in Guild Wars 2 at all, since they seem to have moved on by now, or are still hiding in the Crystal Desert, a region we can't yet access. We are not native to Tyria at all, and we're kind of, no matter what island or what region of the planet we originated, are still aliens in one of the most literal senses of the word. Now, we know this fact, but nothing more about it. So, two mysteries for this episode then, guys. What is this mysterious realm or planet that serves as the true home of humanity? Is it also by any chance the true home of the gods? Who else lives there? Did we have consent when we were originally moved? Were those original humans that lived on both Tyria and on some other planet doing it willingly? What did they know that's now been lost over time? Why did they move us at all? And then also, where did the gods choose to place us? Was it on this mysterious island to the west of Canthan we can see on the Order of Whispers map? Or maybe was it somewhere south of Canthan? Xingji Isle, as the article An Empire Divided suggests? What place could be special enough on Tyria, I guess is what I'm saying, to be the birthing of essentially an entire race? And this is where one final spanner was thrown in the works for Guild Wars 2. Towards the end of the personal story, there is a suggestion that with some fancy footworkery you can work around, I suppose, but it suggested that Ur was the place that the gods first chose to place humanity. Now, Ur is a very significant location. Ur is where the gods themselves chose to live. So I can see that happening, but then that completely devalues everything we've just heard about how the humans migrated from the south. Regardless, what's exciting to me in particular is that in the Guild Wars universe, where it's an established fact that there is life out there beyond Tyria, in other realms of existence and on other planets, the curiosity doesn't just stop from finding extraterrestrial life perhaps, but it's from even finding ourselves, our own lives. Other humans are out there. Somewhere, there's a world full of humans with perhaps different technologies and histories who are far older than we are, and maybe one day we'll get to meet them. Maybe we already did meet one of them, and maybe when we can stop for a proper conversation, they'll have some answers for us. So there you go, guys. Thank you very much for watching. In a couple of days, we're going to take a look at the other playable races. Humanity, after all, are now, as you can see, the newcomers to the world. All the other playable races, they are native to Tyria, as far as we can see, and they've been here a lot longer than we have. I'll see you next time.